Hi everyone, thanks to Austmine for the invitation to present today. This particular topic is very close to my own heart. SoilCyclers has been working on circular mine and recycling strategies for more than 13 years now, originally across the construction and waste industry and more recently in the mining industry as well. So for me, the numbers that the mining industry has, just the sheer volume of everything, means that there's so much opportunity to make a real difference to some of the environmental issues that we have. So this particular project is a collaboration between 3 Austmine members, so Cammel Consulting, Innovate, Enviro, and also SoilCyclers. Wendy, could you flick to the next slide, please? So it's a joint venture between these 3 companies, and I think we skipped a slide then, Wendy, but that's okay. And it was jointly funded by Idemitsu, Ensham Resources and Ignited, so we're very grateful to them for their support. One of the things that the collaboration was really brought home to me was that we would not have been successful without all 3 of these businesses involved and the support of Idemitsu and Ensham and Ignited as well. So this particular project is a real testament to the collaboration and what can be achieved when businesses work together. Next slide, please, Wendy. So the team that was involved, Cameron Smart, who's the Managing Director of Cammel Consulting, myself, I'm the Managing Director of SoilCyclers, and Butch Uttridge, who's the Managing Director of Innovate Enviro. So Butch is our water specialist, Cam is our mining and project management and engineering specialist, and SoilCyclers obviously looks after the soil. Next slide, please, Wendy. So the project involved coming up with, working with some of the problems that mine sites commonly have in relation to rehabilitation and using their waste to fix those problems. So problem number 1 is a topsoil deficit. Many mines have a topsoil deficit. Next slide, please, Wendy. Problem number 2 is that a lot of sites are reliant on natural rainfall. And that natural rainfall maybe doesn't come at the time of seeding, or you get some natural rainfall and the seeds germinate, but then there's no follow-up rainfall to get that consistent revegetation outcome. Next slide, please, Wendy. And final issue that this particular site had, and many sites have, is they need to manage their wastewater in their mine void. So we saw those 3 problems, and we knew we had a good solution that we could bring forwards. Can I have the next slide, please, Wendy? So our solution was about making topsoil from coal mine overburden of the site. Need wastewater to irrigate that revegetation and create rapid growth and rapid pasture coverage. And the final part of that solution was about identifying plants and pastures that are accepting of that salty water and challenging soil conditions. Next slide, please, Wendy. So first thing we did was we tested overburden, about 20 stockpiles from across the entire site. We were looking for materials that were the right texture, so the kind of texture that would hold moisture. We were also looking for materials that had competent rocks so that we could make a second product, a rock mulch byproduct from our process where we were separating the larger rock from the smaller particles to make soil. Next slide, please, Wendy. So just on that testing, for me and for our team, a lot of the test results that we saw in the coal mine overburden were quite similar to some of the challenging soils that Queensland has. So we originally came from a background where we revegetated, so used recycled materials from beside the highways to revegetate on roads and quite steep embankments, sometimes in places where you can't get back to those areas to fix problems if you get that rehabilitation wrong. So really interesting background and applying something from a different industry in this mining space as part of this collaboration. So the next thing we did, and you're going to have to excuse me for my lack of technical terms here, because Butch is our water specialist, was a bioremediation of the mine void water using a floating wetland system. So those photos you can see there are the floating wetland system being constructed. Could I have the next slide, please, Wendy? Yep, sorry, Wendy, you can flick past this slide and the next couple of slides relatively quickly, but that's just the floating wetlands with water in there and plants growing. So the next stage was the spoil amelioration. So that was using mobile trommel screens to mix ameliorants, and I'll just get you to pause here on this one, please, Wendy, to mix ameliorants to just, if you can just pause those slides, Wendy, maybe go back one for me, please. Thank you. So trommel screens were used to sift out the large particles, aerate the stockpiles, and mix in the ameliorants that we needed to mix in to make adjustments to the physical, chemical, and biological properties of this overburden to turn it into something that resembled topsoil. Now, we used AS 4419, the Australian standard for topsoil, as a basis for this, but no mine that I'm aware of has an actual specification for their topsoil. It's more about the outcome. So we did choose not to follow some aspects of AS 4419 in order to achieve them an outcome that was commercial and could be replicated on a larger scale. Could I have the next slide, please? So the next thing we did was trials to determine seeds that would grow in using salty water. So using that pit water and partially remediated pit water that was still fairly salty to determine the seed mix that we were going to use. Next slide, please, Wendy. As part of that, we also trialed some turf because we were looking for something that could provide almost immediate rapid revegetation and erosion controls in high water flow areas. So this particular turf was grown using pit water. So photos on the left-hand side are when it was planted, 45 degrees that day and for the next 3 weeks afterwards. It was watered using, so the bottom photos are the turf that was watered using a shandy mix, so partially treated pit water. And sorry, the bottom photos are the turf that was watered using full pit water. So that was about 10,000 EC, and the top photos are using a partially treated shandy mix water, about 5,000 EC. Could I have the next slide, please? So as you can see from those photos, we got really good, that turf was pretty well dead when it went in. It had been heat stressed, and we got really good rapid growth of that turf and establishment of that turf using salty pit water, both full salty pit water and also partially treated salty pit water. So the next thing we did was we set up plots to trial a couple of different seed mixes and 4 different soil types and multiple different irrigation types. So those plots, the 2 of them were 2 different types of overburden, a Permian overburden and a tertiary overburden. Then one lot of the soil was ameliorated topsoil from the mine, and another lot of soil was unamended topsoil from the mine. So we did a combination of day watering and night watering using full salt pit water and also partially treated 5,000 EC pit water as well. Next slide, please, Wendy. And maybe one more click for me as well, please, Wendy. So this particular slide is our results. So sorry, just if you can go back to that slide for me, please, Wendy. I should have done the pointing on the mouse, but my internet wasn't great, so we decided to do it this way this morning. So this is our results. Watered using 5,000 EC partially treated mine void water for 6 weeks, and grown in ameliorated tertiary coal mine overburden. a salt tolerant seed mix. Now, as you can see, that's pretty decent coverage. And 6 months after the watering stopped, that particular combination is still doing extremely well, even though it has been in drought conditions for 6 months. So what we found was that we were able to use the mine's waste to create topsoil, which they could use for their revegetation. And actually we found that coal mine overburden outperformed their existing site topsoil and their ameliorated topsoil as well. So I'll talk a bit more about the results shortly. Could I have the next slide, please, Wendy? So a couple of different comparisons here. There's a lot of data behind this trial and I'm giving an overview here. So the straight pit water and the shandy mixed water and no watering, you can see on that left-hand graph, the water type comparison. These are the growth rates of the grass on those plots. So you can see no watering didn't do brilliantly. They got a little bit of rain, but then no follow-up rain. And, you know, that's an indication of the conditions that a lot of mine sites are having to revegetate and rehabilitate under. Then the next line, the blue line, is the straight pit water. So the straight pit water outperformed no watering. Then the top line is the shandy mixed water. On that right-hand side, you can see the growth rates of the day watering and the night watering versus no watering at all. So you can see no watering at all, the growth rates are the same as in that left-hand graph. The day watering definitely outperformed the no watering at all, but the night watering was the star performer for us. So that combination of night watering, which reduces that salt uptake, was definitely the ideal situation. Could I have the next slide, please, Wendy? So our learnings from this project were firstly that you can ameliorate coal mine overburden and make it perform better than existing site topsoil and even ameliorated site topsoil. The reason for that is probably the moisture holding capacity of that material that we chose. A lot of those overburden do have much better moisture holding capacity than many of the topsoils I see on my clients' sites. So I have other sites where their topsoil just doesn't have much moisture retention capacity, and some of the issues that they're seeing with growth are more around, not so much around chemistry of their soil, but around the moisture holding capacity of their soil. So second learning was that poor quality soils that weren't watered definitely grew more weeds, and also certain fertilizers grew more weeds. So we were able to help Ensham with their fertilizer mix to help reduce their weeds on their revegetation. Next thing we found was that irrigation with partially treated water and untreated pit water generated better revegetation than the unwatered plots. Now, I'm not advocating that you would water something long-term with salty water. This is a short-term vegetation establishment and erosion control establishment for sites that, you know, don't have a lot of topsoil. You don't want a situation where your revegetation is eroding and you're having to replace topsoil and reduce your already existing low stocks of topsoil because you're fixing your revegetation work. So next thing we found was that night watering outperformed the day watering. And while the floating wetland plants weren't successful at reducing the salt in the time frame and the climate conditions during the trial, now those wetland plants went into the floating wetlands, unfortunately, in 45-degree heat and didn't cope brilliantly with that situation. What we did found was that they did uptake and store salt. So there's a few follow-up things we'll be working on with those floating wetland plants. And finally, we identified a turf that can be watered with full pit water for virtually immediate erosion control in high flow areas. So another interesting opportunity for some of our mining clients to consider with their revegetation. Wendy, could I have the next slide, please? I think it's the last one. So that's everything from me today. very happy to answer any questions, but I just want to acknowledge one more time Idemitsu, Ensham Resources and Mets Ignited for their support in doing something that was considered pretty wild when we first proposed it, but also the team as well. So Innovate, Enviro and Cammel Consulting working alongside SoilCyclers. I have loved every part of this collaboration, and we're looking forward to the next ones.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Alison. Another fantastic project there focusing on revegetation and utilising mine waste